Have you ever said, "I'm fine" so many times that even you started to believe it? I used to. Every single day in Denmark I smiled, worked, and pretended I was okay. Until one quiet night, under the cold northern sky, I couldn't pretend anymore. This is the story of how I stopped lying to myself, how English became my mirror, and how honesty, spoken in a foreign language, set me free. Maybe it could do the same for you. The mask I wore every day. Every morning in Denmark, I woke up to the sound of quiet streets and cold air that smelled like coffee and sea salt. People here always said hedge, with bright smiles. And me? I smiled back perfectly. I said I'm fine like it was my daily prayer. But inside I was breaking. Quietly, politely, invisibly. That it's funny how easy lying can become when it's in another language. I'm fine sounded softer in English, almost elegant. It made my sadness feel less messy, more controlled. I convinced myself that pretending was a kind of strength, that if I just kept smiling, kept saying I'm fine, maybe one day it would be true. Spoiler, it never was. You see, moving to Denmark wasn't the hard part. The hard part was realizing that no one really knew the real me anymore. Not even myself. I became fluent in survival, not English. Fluent in small talk, not honesty. At first, I thought this was what adults did. Hold it together, stay polite, never burden others. But there's something cruel about that idea. Especially when you're far from home. Pretending becomes your comfort zone. It's safe, yes, but it also keeps you lonely. Like living behind a glass wall. You can see everyone, but you can't feel anyone. There's a strange thing the brain does when you keep lying to it. Psychologists call it emotional numbing. Basically, your mind stops sending signals of sadness because it assumes you won't listen anyway. So you stop crying. You stop feeling. You just function, like an app running in low battery mode. And that's how I lived for months. I went to language classes, bought pastries from the same bakery, rode my bike past lakes that froze in winter, all while saying I'm fine, over and over until it became my second name. But here's the thing, pretending doesn't protect you forever. It just delays the breakdown. Because every I'm fine you whisper when you're not, is a small betrayal. Not to others, to yourself. That was me. A man fluent in English lies, smiling under Danish clouds. But one night the mask cracked. The quiet loneliness of a foreign land. There's a certain silence in Denmark that's beautiful, until it isn't. First I loved it. The calm streets, the sound of bicycles on wet pavement, the way people respected space. It felt peaceful. Almost poetic. But soon that same silence started echoing inside me. It became the sound of my own loneliness. That I remember sitting in a cafe in Aarhus one gray afternoon. Everyone was talking softly, laughing gently, sipping their lattes like time didn't exist. I wanted to join in. I wanted to belong. But the moment I opened my mouth, my words came out stiff, too careful, too foreign. My accent felt like a wall. My own voice sounded like an intruder. So I smiled instead, my universal shield. That's the thing about being a foreigner. You learn to shrink yourself, to speak less, to be nice. You don't want to bother anyone, or worse, reveal how lonely you really are. And when people ask, "How's everything?" you say, "Good," because it's easier than explaining the heavy truth sitting on your chest. Loneliness abroad has a strange flavor. It's not the loud, dramatic kind. It's quiet, polite, well-mannered. It hides behind your routines. You go to work, to class, to the supermarket, but your heart stays untranslated. You start missing things you never thought you'd miss. Even the noise, even the chaos of your home country. Psychologists say that social isolation activates the same areas in the brain as physical pain. That means loneliness literally hurts. But unlike a bruise, you can't show it. So, you patch it up with Netflix, with long walks, with scrolling through lives that look happier than yours. And every day your I'm fine gets a little heavier. I used to think I was the only one feeling that way, until I noticed the same quiet sadness in other expats' eyes. We were all smiling in the same language of survival. We were all pretending. And then one winter night, when the sky turned deep blue at 4 p.m., I realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember the last time I felt real. That was the moment the silence became too loud to ignore. The night I couldn't sleep. It was one of those Danish nights when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The wind rattled the windows, the streetlights painted pale circles on the snow, and my mind refused to rest. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every I'm fine I'd ever said. Each one sounded emptier than the last. You know that feeling when you're too tired to sleep? That was me. My body was exhausted, but my thoughts were running marathons. I kept asking myself, when did pretending become easier than feeling? When did fine become my favorite lie? The truth hit me in the quietest way. I wasn't sad because life in Denmark was hard. I was sad because I had stopped being honest even with myself. I had built a beautiful little prison, decorated it with polite smiles and English phrases, and locked myself inside outside. The wind howled like it was trying to wake me up. Inside I felt something crack. I got out of bed, made tea, and stood by the window. The city was asleep, but the stars were awake. Cold, distant, and painfully real. I whispered, I'm not fine. For the first time in months. The words felt awkward, shaky, almost foreign. But they were mine. And it was strange, saying the truth didn't break me. It calmed me. My chest loosened, my shoulders dropped. For the first time I wasn't performing. I was simply being. There's a reason therapists say that naming your emotions is the first step to healing. Neuroscientists have found that when you label what you feel, sad, angry, lonely, your amygdala, the part of your brain that panics, actually quiets down. Honesty literally rewires your brain to breathe again. That night I didn't sleep, but I rested. There's a difference. I stopped trying to fix everything. I just sat with myself, the broken, quiet human version. And in that stillness, I realized something no self-help book ever told me. Sometimes not being fine is the most honest English sentence you'll ever say. The next morning, I woke up tired but lighter, not healed but human again. And that small honesty opened a door I didn't know existed. The stranger who noticed. A few days later I met him. A Danish guy from my language class named Emil. He wasn't loud or overly friendly, just one of those calm people who seem comfortable in silence. We often exchanged polite hedge and small talk about the weather. But that day something was different. He looked at me, really looked, and asked, "Are you okay?" Not the usual small talk kind. The real kind, The kind that waits for an honest answer. My mouth opened automatically to deliver the standard script. Yeah, I'm fine. But the words got stuck in my throat. Maybe it was the way he asked, or maybe I was just tired of lying. So instead, I laughed awkwardly and said, "Actually, I don't know." He smiled. Not the polite kind, but the understanding kind. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You don't have to be fine to learn English. You just have to be real." We ended up sitting in that little cafe near the harbor for hours. I told him things I hadn't told anyone. How I felt invisible. How English had become my mask. How I missed my old self. The one who used to talk freely, laugh loudly, dream boldly. Emil listened without interrupting. Just quiet nods and soft "I see." And when I apologized for my bad English, he laughed. "Your English isn't bad," he said. "It's just too polite. Try speaking like you feel, not like you think." That hit me like a splash of cold water. Speak like you feel, not like you think. Sounded simple, but it changed everything. I realized I had been editing myself, not just my grammar but my emotions. Every sentence I spoke had to sound smart, correct, safe. No wonder my words felt lifeless. Psychologists call this emotional suppression, the habit of hiding feelings to appear okay. Studies show it increases anxiety, lowers connection, and literally drains your energy. No wonder I was tired all the time. That night, I went home and recorded myself speaking English. Not perfectly, not politely, just honestly. My voice cracked, my accent stumbled, but for the first time it sounded like me. Sometimes it takes one stranger, one unexpected conversation, to remind you that you're not invisible. That being seen starts with being real. And from that moment, English stopped being a subject. It became my mirror. When English became my mirror, it's strange how a language can change its meaning depending on how you use it. Before that night, English was just a tool, something I studied, corrected, and polished. I used it to sound competent, not connected. But after talking with Emil, I started seeing it differently. English stopped being my performance. It became my mirror. Every morning I'd sit by the window with my coffee and start talking to myself in English out loud, no script, no grammar rules. At first it felt weird, like I was auditioning for a movie no one would watch. But slowly something shifted. I stopped trying to sound perfect. I started trying to sound true. I remember one morning, I looked at my reflection and said, "I'm lonely." My voice cracked, but I didn't hide it. Then I said, "I'm scared of failing. I miss home. I want to feel proud again." Each sentence was a small confession, not to the world but to myself. And with every truth, English stopped being foreign. It started to feel like home. There's science behind that too. Linguists say that speaking a foreign language can actually give you emotional distance. Enough space to say things you couldn't in your native tongue. But for me, it worked the opposite way. English brought me closer to what I really felt. It was like my brain had no old memories attached to these words, so I could finally tell the truth without fear. Soon I began journaling in English, talking to friends online, even recording short voice notes, not to show off but to understand myself. My sentences were clumsy but honest. And I realized that's the real secret to fluency. Not knowing every word, but daring to use the ones that mattered. It's funny. People think learning English is about mastering tenses and idioms. But sometimes it's about mastering the courage to be you in another language. When you stop hiding behind perfect grammar, you start connecting with real people. You stop translating and start living. That's what happened to me. English stopped being an exam. It became therapy, prayer, confession, all in one. I wasn't just learning to speak English anymore. I was learning to speak myself. And that changed everything. The science of honesty. You know what's wild? Your brain actually rewards you for being honest. Neuroscientists at the University of Southern California discovered that when you tell the truth, especially after hiding it, your brain releases dopamine, the same chemical that makes you feel relief and calm. In short, honesty is literally healing. And yet, most of us treat it like danger. For months I had trained myself to say the right thing, not the real thing. It wasn't just about English, it was survival. I didn't want to sound weak or emotional, especially in a foreign country where everyone seemed effortlessly composed. But inside, my nervous system was working overtime. My brain had become a full-time PR manager for my emotions, editing, filtering, suppressing. When I started speaking honestly in English, something unexpected happened. My anxiety dropped. My energy returned. I even started sleeping better. It was like my mind finally got permission to stop pretending. Here's why. When you lie, your body produces stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, as if you're in danger. That's why keeping secrets or suppressing emotions makes you feel tense and tired. But when you tell the truth, your parasympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for rest and recovery, kicks in. Your body literally exhales. It's strange, right? We spend years building emotional walls, thinking they'll protect us. But biology says otherwise. Walls trap pain inside. Honesty releases it. I started testing this theory. Every day I practiced saying one honest sentence in English to myself, to a friend, even to my journal. Simple things like, I'm nervous today, or I feel grateful. And the more I did it, the lighter I felt. It was like clearing mental dust that had been sitting there for years. Psychologists call this emotional labeling. When you name what you feel, you take power away from it. The emotion stops controlling you because your brain has already processed it. That's not magic. That's neuroscience. So no, speaking honestly doesn't make you weak. It makes you wired for peace. And the irony? The more honest I became in English, the more fluent I became too. Because honesty simplifies language. When you stop hiding, your words flow naturally. I used to think fluency meant perfection. Now I know. Real fluency is the courage to speak truth, even when your voice trembles. How speaking saved me. When people talk about learning English, they imagine textbooks, podcasts, or grammar drills. But for me, English became something else, a lifeline. Every word I spoke honestly pulled me a little closer back to myself. It wasn't just a language skill anymore. It was emotional CPR. I began recording short voice diaries every night. Nothing fancy. Just me, my phone, and my messy thoughts in English. Some nights I sounded confident. Other nights my voice shook. But I kept going. And something beautiful happened. I started feeling proud, not perfect. The first time I said out loud, I had a hard day, but I'm okay. I almost cried, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. My words finally matched my feelings, and that alignment between thought and speech felt like peace. Researchers from Stanford found that when people verbalize their emotions, even in a second language, their stress levels drop and emotional clarity rises. Why? Because speech organizes chaos. The moment you speak something out loud, your brain stops spinning it endlessly inside. It's like turning noise into music, imperfect but meaningful. Soon I started doing this with others, classmates, coworkers, even strangers. My English wasn't flawless, but it was alive. And people responded differently. They listened. They opened up. Because truth, no matter the accent, is magnetic. It connects humans faster than perfect grammar ever could. Slowly, my world in Denmark began to change. I joined a small English conversation group, not to practice, but to share. We talked about homesickness, hope, and silly cultural mistakes. We laughed at our own accents. And for the first time, English stopped being a bridge between countries. It became a bridge between hearts, and here's the twist. The more I spoke, the less lonely I felt, even when I was still alone. Because speaking honestly made me realize something profound. I wasn't broken. I was just human. That's the power of words. Not to impress, but to express. Not to prove you're perfect, but to remind you you're alive. And the night I fully understood that truth, the Danish sky had one more lesson waiting for me. Under the Danish stars. That night, the sky over Aarhus was crystal clear. One of those rare winter evenings when the cold sharpens everything, even your thoughts. I walked down to the harbor, hands buried deep in my coat, and looked up. The stars looked impossibly close, like they were whispering something ancient. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an outsider here. I stood there, breathing in the freezing air, thinking about the person I used to be, the one who said I'm fine on autopilot, who smiled to survive, who confused politeness with strength. That version of me had spent so much energy pretending to be okay that I'd forgotten what okay actually felt like. But that night, under those Danish stars, I finally said it, out loud to no one in particular. I'm not fine, but I'm okay with that. And something inside me softened. The words hung in the air, simple but sacred. I wasn't trying to fix myself. I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just telling the truth. That it's funny. People think freedom comes from adventure, success, or escape. But sometimes it starts with one quiet confession to the night sky. One sentence that finally aligns with your heart. As I watched my breath fade into the cold, I realized English had given me something my own language never had. Distance. Enough to see myself clearly, but closeness. Enough to say what I truly felt. It wasn't about vocabulary anymore. It was about vulnerability. About daring to exist in the open, accent and all. Since that night, I've stopped saying I'm fine when I'm not. I say I'm tired. I'm learning. I'm still figuring it out. And somehow that honesty connects me to people faster than any perfect phrase ever did. So if you're listening to this, maybe you're tired of pretending too. Maybe you've been carrying a quiet ache behind your polite smile. So it's okay. You don't have to be fine. You just have to be real. Under the Danish stars, I learned that truth doesn't set you free all at once. It does it quietly, one honest sentence at a time. That's the night I stopped pretending. And honestly, that's when I started living.